Yes, okay, I'm just gonna refer, since we're pressed for time, we're gonna.
And turn the video on.
Do I have to turn the camera?
You might need to know this is the camera. So you need to, here, can I just?
And then we'll go to L3 after. Okay, cool. So they're asking about those. Just because it's on the phone. Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Perfect. Here, we can pop that one open. And then we can just hit record and it can just sit. Perfect.
It is recording.
Yeah, I set it up to.
Okay. Then we're good. L3, yes.
Okay, which way is that?
That one is just right up the way.
Everyone, my name is Betsy Johnson. I'm one of the coordinators for Walk Bike Springfield, which is a residents, group of residents who now been meeting for 11 years to improve the safety of walking and biking in Springfield. My distinguished panelists, in order to save time, I'm not going to give you their bios are on the website. We have Kristen Sykes with the Holyoke Bike Ped Committee. Raise your hand. We have Liam, I can never pronounce her last name. Liam, who is with Walk Bike Springfield, and Lexus, who's got a double last name. And with Mass Bike, but also the Manhan Rail Trail. So at this point, I'm going to turn it initially over to Kristen, who will explain what inspired this workshop from back last February.
Everyone can hear? Yeah. Okay, great. Hi, I'm Kristen Sykes. I live in Holyoke. Use she, her pronouns. So I'm a biker and a walker, and I was involved with, I was the Connecticut River Valley chapter chair for Mass Bike, and then joined the Mass Bike board. I do conservation for my day job as well. and started thinking about the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissions, if anyone knows them. They're really fantastic. They do annual conferences, and essentially they work with communities all over the Commonwealth to support the conservation commissions, you know, and their main goal is upholding the Wetlands Protection Act, which can be pretty complicated and in the weeds. So I started thinking about all the bicycle and pedestrian advocacy groups, whether they're officially city groups or they're, you know, just residents who want to improve walking and biking. And how could we not reinvent the wheel, pun intended, and be able to utilize things that, you know, others are doing in their own communities, knowing that most of the people who are involved with these committees, including myself, are volunteers, and how can we learn from each other? So I was on the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition board, and I worked with Caitlin Mook, their executive director, to write a grant to support a staff person that would put together a whole database of all the bicycle, and that's Alexis, and she's still here today, so doing an awesome job. So she basically, she'll probably talk about this more, put together a database of all the bicycle and pedestrian committees in all their different forms, and adjacent ones, you know, like councils on aging or disability commissions or others, people who would benefit from improving, in particular, biking and walking infrastructure in their town. So that was kind of the inspiration. And so I had actually Alexis come and speak at one of our bicycle and pedestrian committee meetings about, like, how can we improve? What are they doing in other cities? And, you know, it can be a little challenging. Holyoke is a little under-resourced. So, you know, doing what they did in Wellesley is maybe not going to work in Holyoke, for instance. We don't necessarily have the same engagement by our citizenry or, you know, the resources. So just because I, you know, have too much time on my hands, I guess, I decided I would pull together a whole bunch of bicycle and pedestrian advocates from kind of Lower Hampshire County and Upper Hampden County. So that included East Hampton, Chicopee, West Springfield, Westfield, Holyoke, to just get together and talk about what we all were working on, some grants that we had in Holyoke that we'll be implementing around traffic calming and speed management, about connected trail networks, and how can we try to, I mean, we have several state highways and other routes, we have several long distance bike paths. How can we all work together to create a multi-municipal bike network, and really try to support each other? So we've met twice. We've been meeting at the Holyoke Public Library, and we just talk about all the things that we're working on. We've been supporting each other's events, which we're all going to get into some of that, but mostly it was just kind of trying to come together as local communities. Some of us have engagement by our cities and towns and our elected officials, others don't. And so how can we also provide feedback to each other of how do you engage local elected officials in improving biking and walking? So that was kind of the impetus. We're all there because we love biking and walking, and we want to support each other. So.
Well, one other group you didn't mention was the South Hadley.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Who
Sorry, I left
came and
that out.
helped
Right, South
lead our
Hadley.
walk this morning as a
Yeah.
result of
So
that.
South Hadley was part of that too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Betsy.
But one of the things we felt we needed to start with is that there are these statewide entities which have been instrumental over the years to support our local efforts. I'm with Walk Massachusetts, or what was for years Walk Boston. And we found before we started Walk Bike Springfield that through the Mass in Motion program and our Department of Public Health, Walk Boston had actually done 13 walk audits in our city, focused on a number of our schools. So that gave us the basis for sort of starting to know who was who and get ourselves together. And so I mention this because if you're from a community that really doesn't have folks, you know, organized to do advocacy, they're one of the groups who one can reach out to and get involved to help you. Usually their starting point is with organizing walk audits and having people really get out. It's as much a community building activity as it is a roadway assessment activity. But then I'm also going to turn it over to Alexis here to talk a little bit more about other kinds of things Mass Bike, has also been doing.
Yeah, so, can you hear me? Yep. So I live in East Hampton and I moved to East Hampton because of the extensive rail trail network. I was out in Boston and my husband and I were both remote during COVID, and I looked at the map and I saw like 25 miles of connected rail trail and I was like, ooh, hello. So then when I moved to my neighborhood, I'm only 2 blocks from the rail trail, but I am a half a mile away from the entrance because there's no neighborhood connection. So I joined the Manhan Rail Trail and soon observed kind of the quagmire that is city politics and was like, okay, let me go a level higher. And then I ended up on the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, MPO, Bike Ped Subcommittee. I attend, for now, like 4 years, I attend the Joint Transportation Committee as a voting member, which I didn't even know what an MPO was when I started. And then I just,
Metropolitan Planning Organization.
thank you.
And it's the Joint Transportation Committee. And I'm the pedestrian rep.
Oh yeah, and that's where I met Betsy. And I started compiling a list of all the other similar bike ped groups in the region. And I think I had a meeting with Kristen back in like 22 and just asked her a ton of questions. And she's like, do you want a job? So I was a volunteer for a year. I still don't have that connection to the rail trail, by the way. But we did get our override passed like 3 days ago. So there's a chance. So yeah, now I kind of jumped the next level and work at Mass Bike, which is a statewide organization for bike advocacy. They have been around for 50 years. Next year is our 50th anniversary. We're hoping to do some fun gala stuff. And I wrote down what we actually work on. We mostly work on policy stuff, and that's what we're known for, including the 4-foot passing signs that you see on the side of the road. Yay! Distracted driving, which actually went into law like, I want to say like January of 2020, so nobody was paying attention. Speaking of distracted. Truck safety, which I think has gotten a little bit sidelined, but it's about like adding side guards and cameras onto trucks that the state or the city owns. Automated enforcement, which we're currently still working on and partnering with other like Walk Massachusetts, T for May. We just had a lobby day last February about that. And then most recently and very much in the news is classification of e-bikes and micromobility. Please don't ask me about that. But yeah, when I started working, the first thing I did was ask Galen what other organizations there were like my position that I have at PVPC throughout the state, and turns out there wasn't any. So I started having interviews with all 13 NPOs, and I've actually formed real relationships with folks, including Adam right there from Central Massachusetts. This week alone, I went to three Boston MPO meetings and 1 on-site for PVPC and 2 in-person online meetings. Sorry, whatever, my brain. Anyway, point is I've built relationships to bridge the gap between legislative work and local work. And on that bike ped list, there's over 200 bike ped groups in the state. And we've really found in our group that like every municipality has strengths and weaknesses, and they're not the same. Like Chicopee has amazing leadership and almost no community members doing anything. The Manhan Rail Trail, we have an amazing rail trail network, which I know South Hadley is sad that they don't have, but we have no bike network. So there's like, it's great to learn from your neighbors because most of us are volunteers. I actually get paid, but most of us are volunteers and we all have limited time and capacity. So how can you borrow the knowledge from other groups that are successful?
And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Liam, who is one of the newest members of the Massachusetts Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Group. He will explain what that is. We're really privileged. We've had traditionally, again, not enough representation from Western Mass. And the fact that, I mean, Pioneer Valley Planning Commission has had a space, but there has not been real people on the, from Western Mass, actually.
He's an over. He's not a
Not
bot.
somebody whose job it is not, and is doing it as a volunteer, and I think, so, you've now, been on MabTab for, 3 months now?
Yeah, that's 3 months.
People know about it. So, yeah. There you go.
I work in radio, so that's especially embarrassing. Hi, everyone. I'm Liam, he, him, his. Yeah, as Betsy mentioned, one of the many hats that I wear that I'm excited to talk about today is being a MabHab. And for those of you who don't know what that acronym is, that is the Massachusetts Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board. So that is a sort of state advisory board of the Mass DOT. There are currently 26 sort of members on it. What's neat is that 12 of those members are sort of internal stakeholders to the state. So there are a lot of, Mass DOT folks. There are a lot of folks from relevant other sort of state organizations. So, for reference, I work in like an accessibility space, providing accessibility for people in the valley who are blind and low vision. And traditionally, there have been people from, the State Commission for the Blind on that board to talk about, orientation and mobility and equitable transport. So those sort of some of the folks that you'll see from the state. And then what's awesome is that there are sort of 14 external advocate members. There's a permanent seat for a representative from Walk Mass. There's a permanent seat for Mass Bike. And then there are 12 advocate seats. So anyone who is basically an advocate can apply. It's a 2-year term. They did applications fall of last year. People were sworn in this year. So yeah, we've had a total of 3 meetings. We meet every other month. But anyone who is basically an advocate in the state can, and I would highly recommend that if you are interested in both getting to advise on statewide policy and learn more about it, that it's something that you, if you're interested, apply for. It's again, our first meeting was just getting sworn in. We've had 2 meetings, but we've got to talk already about, the upcoming micromobility report and legislature and get to give feedback on that. Recently, we got to talk about the complete streets policy that's going to be implemented, a couple years down the line as things sort of move at that pace, and the new safe highway, safe streets, and vulnerable road users. So it's a really great opportunity to get to learn how things in the state work, but then also give what feels like really valuable feedback and input and drive change on a state level.
One of the things I want to mention is the meetings are open, both online, through Zoom or actually in person. The meetings rotate around the state. The most recent one was up in Salem, for example, and I don't know where the next one is, but they're Wednesday afternoons from 1 to 3. If you just Google Massachusetts Bicycle and Pedestrian Advocacy, you'll come up to the website that lists all of the meeting dates and has the Zoom link. And it's an open Zoom link. I know I try to at least have it in my background on the afternoons that because you definitely hear about and learn about potential projects in the area sooner than you might otherwise hear.
Also, there's recordings.
There, okay, and it's recorded.
And many years back, you can literally just put them on in the background. It's like pretend it's a podcast.
So that's this umbrella of statewide support entities that have really, over the years, been instrumental in inspiring some of us locally to do something about this. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over back to Kristen, who's going to talk about the origins of the Holyoke Bike and Ped Committee, but also just at that meeting back in February, we basically shared some very inspirational activities as well as some of our challenges. So
And real quick,
You're
I'm
on.
just gonna turn it back over to Liam because I think he had a few more things to add before we move to Holyoke. So.
Oh, yeah, one of the people in charge of, not in charge, who sort of organizes Map Pizza, and he's local. And then, you know, as we've, a common theme this morning has been, you know, how do we as Western Mass have better representation? I do want to say, when I was there at that first meeting where we were all sworn in, I was really pleasantly surprised to see how many folks were from basically outside of the 95 belt. They have had a very intentional sort of selection to make sure that there is, you know, more than one person from our side of the state on that board. So, you know, if you're sitting next to someone, you're both thinking, oh, we should apply. Like, I don't want that to discourage you because you only think one of you's gonna get it. So,
And Pete Sutton is the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator for the whole state for MassDOT. He's from Western Massachusetts and he's very accessible. So he's also someone you can reach out to. And then folks are probably aware of the Mass Trails program, which really is pretty amazing at this point. For years, MassDOT would get funding. I used to work for the Appalachian Mountain Club for a long time on trails. So they would get funding from the federal government and it just sat there and it didn't get spent because DOT wasn't spending the money on trails. And there's really been an evolution within DOT and then really bringing together DCR, DOT, and some of the other agencies to spend the money. And now they have like a one-stop shop, Mass Trails. You can go on there and you're like, I want to get a crosswalk, you know, from a protected land to a trail, or I want to get a new section of rail trail. And you can like find out what grants are available. Amanda Lewis, who runs that program for DCR, you know, works out of Western Massachusetts. A few years ago, I actually had Amanda, Pete, the head of our planning department, and others ride on a Mass Trails proposed project on Route 5. So we all just went for a bike ride and then had lunch afterwards. So these folks are really accessible. And also they want to get out from behind the screen like we all do. They want to go for a walk or a bike ride. Similarly with your elected officials. So anytime you can provide an opportunity for people on the ground to experience it. So that will be a good segue for me to talk about Holyoke. I think maybe something slightly different with the Holyoke Bike Ped Committee to some of the others is we're officially a city committee. We were created by a city council ordinance in 2013, actually by Aaron Vega, who was a city council member, then went on to become a state rep, was the head of our Office of Planning and Economic Development, and now he's moved on to other bigger and brighter things. So he created that ordinance. And it really was to try to take advantage of the Complete Streets program to create more opportunities for biking and walking in the city. So some of our goals that I'll just share are to provide recommendations to the City Council on bicycle and pedestrian safety, provide a forum for residents and community organizations to raise bicycling and pedestrian related issues and concerns. So we meet monthly. We have a public comment period at the beginning. Also to promote education and public outreach on biking and walking, to promote biking and walking as really helpful for Holyoke residents. And 25% of our population doesn't have a car, so even more so. And we also are a disadvantaged community, so a lot of people don't have cars. So we really want to make sure that, you know, people can get around the city. Working with our planning department is called OPED. It's the Office of Planning Economic Development, so it kind of merges economics and planning. So we work with OPED. Public health infrastructure, provide advice and recommendations on physical infrastructure related to walkways, trails, cycling networks, traffic calming, traffic management. And then a couple other things which really relates to what we were talking about before is coordinate with external agencies on regional trail connections. So there's some incredible opportunities on road and also with the rail trail. I mean, Alexis and all of us are so excited about the Mass Central Rail Trail. Being able to ride all the way from New Haven to Boston without getting on a road is going to be amazing. So we look forward to that day. And I know there's some work to be done in places like Belchertown and Southampton and all those places in Eastern Massachusetts. But there's a lot of really great opportunities, especially along Route 5. And, you know, we should also talk about Westfield and West Springfield have mayors that are really into biking. I had the opportunity to sit in on a meeting where they were there with like several MassDOT people. And it was like the mayors that were like pumped about the biking part. And I was like, yes, great. So, you know, it kind of takes a village to get everyone working together. But just to share an inspirational activity. So I used to live in Northampton and I kind of came downriver into Holyoke and did a mayoral bike ride. And we had several city council members. And so then I was like, well, we need to do this in Holyoke. And especially because our mayor was fairly new, not a big bike rider. So I was able to ascertain a bike for him. And then we just recently did our 4th annual mayoral bike ride. So we do it during rush hour, which I think is really key actually, because a lot of people think of cyclists as a recreationalist, and it's a vehicle. Like, people use it to get to work, to get to school. So we need to have the same amenities for bikes that we have for cars and other public transportation. So I think it's really important to take, when we first did that ride in Northampton, and of course they have an amazing rail trail. So several of them expressed fear, concern about riding in the city at rush hour. And Northampton is pretty low traffic compared to other places. So I think it's just really important for our elected officials to get out on the road and to experience what people are experiencing during rush hour. And so in Holyoke, this is our 4th year. We've done a ride all throughout the city with the mayor, had several city council members join us. We actually, last year, for the first time, were able to have Valley Bike join us. So they offered bikes, we were able to offer helmets. And then we tend to have it start and end at a fun place. So there's a great place called Fame. That's a lounge and eatery. That's awesome. It's right by City Hall. So we started and ended there, provided food. We also gave out, swag, like bike lights and other reflective things. So that's an inspirational thing we've done. And I don't know, you all sometimes probably are working away and you kind of feel like you're in a little vacuum. And then I get an email from some people in Keene, New Hampshire, and we're like, we want to do a mayoral bike ride. How did you do that? And I was like, wait, how do you even know about our bike ride? And so to be able to, and I think that's one thing we all want to talk with you all about when our panel is done, is like inspirational things that you all have done. Sometimes you're in the trenches doing this work, that it can be really tough. I mean, honestly, doing bike advocacy, I had no idea how attached people were to parking spaces. Oh my God, I have no idea. So, I think it's important. This work sometimes can take a long time. Even if you do get funding, you see those long horizons, like this project starts and then it's like not going to get done until 2029. And you're like, that feels like a million years away. So sometimes it can be a slog and you can get inspired by other folks. One thing I'll just say on the challenges is many people in the city don't actually know that we have a bicycle and pedestrian committee, including sometimes elected officials. So, I think it's really key to be visible, to do events, publicly. So we have gotten a lot of attention for our mayoral ride, which has been really great. But we've had a challenge keeping the members who are there, having them stay. And so I think that has really been a challenge is our membership and people not really knowing that we exist. So we're trying to do a lot more rides. We hope to do a ride every month all the way into September. I'm also trying to get some youth slots on our bicycle and pedestrian committee and see if we can actually provide a stipend, because I know that is one thing if you want to have people participate who don't necessarily have the means as a volunteer to do it, to be able to provide even a small amount of funding for them to be able to participate. So I'm hopeful that we can get some youth on our committee as well. But I think that those are a few challenges, but and also engagement with our city engineers, as so many areas of the Commonwealth. We didn't have a city engineer for a year and a half. So it took a long time to get a new one. Finally, they're there. We're really excited. One thing I'm actually working on with them is to get a designated bike route through the city. So I think hopefully the more times I say it, the more it might actually happen. But we have a neighborhood called the Flats in Holyoke. And so I'm hoping that it can be called Flats to Friendlies. And we are going to do hopefully a bike ride that starts with ice cream and ends with ice cream. And essentially, I mean, for probably all of you, like, a lot of people are nervous of like, where can they ride and where isn't there a lot of traffic and where are there good amenities? And so we're hoping to be able to chart out a route from Flats to Friendlies. We will have to have a few hills involved, but hopefully they won't be, too steep, and maybe you'll have an e-assisted Valley Bike to take you. But to just let people know, like, we have a lot of tree streets that kind of run parallel that are very low traffic. So if we put that out there, then we maybe even get some simple signage and paint to say, like, this is a designated bike route that is pretty low traffic. It's pretty, maybe it has some amenities that you can like stop by. And I think that would bring a lot more people to like ride that route. So we'll see if it happens, but come back and see me in a few years and maybe we'll have the Flats to Friendly designated bike route.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's turn it over now to Liam to talk about a little bit of the same kinds of Walk Bike Springfield and sort of what got us going, but then, he's one of our newer very active members, and what's inspired him to be so involved.
Yeah, hey, so yeah, Walk Bike Springfield now, as opposed to Holyoke, we are not any sort of government body. We are purely volunteer based. About 10 years ago, that was 2015, the PVPC, which for those of you who don't know what that means, that's the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, and Live Well Springfield, they decided a grant to make a complete streets plan. Eventually, Betsy got on board with that from Walk Boston, and then by the fall of that year, there was a plan. Thing created on paper. It didn't really get much traction. And so then the next year, there was that initial meeting of what became Walk Bike Springfield to really move that forward and get that implemented. Otherwise, there wasn't really much traction. And then, we celebrated basically 10 plus years of advocacy recently. We had a meeting at the start of this year. We said, well, here's what past 10 years has been, and what do we want the next year to look like? And I think a really awesome takeaway that we all sort of came away with was we want to be more involved in our community and want the community to know more about us. So there's a couple things along that have, I think, been really exciting, not just for me, but for the whole organization. And the biggest one that I think personally was our 17 neighborhood ride, and we'll do it next year. And the name is pending, so it could be next year. But a couple reasons that we did that. I mean, first and foremost, there is a perception about Springfield that it's not a place that you can ride a bike. And there is some truth to that I think that we sort of, as advocates, always have to acknowledge that, yes, things need to be better, but they're typically not as bad as people think. So there was a perception there that we wanted to challenge. A couple of us had done the 5 borough bike ride in New York City. I don't know if anyone's done that. If you haven't, it's a blast. They get like 40,000 people every year. We did not get 40,000 this year. But a lot of the neighborhoods in Springfield can also feel very separated. A lot of people may spend most of their time, unless you work in a different neighborhood, live in a different neighborhood, sort of in their own local community. So there's this desire to, show more of the city, get people out of, their own neighborhoods, but also do that by bike to show that, hey, yes, here are the areas where it needs to be better, but here are the areas where it's actually not that bad. Of course, it could still be better, but we got to also show off a lot of the infrastructure. We got to show off, I think it was the first stoplight in Springfield. That was pretty cool. It was a 30-mile ride through all 17 of the neighborhoods. It was party pace. We just said, hey, come out, have fun, join us on a bike ride. And I was talking with Todd. He's another Walk Bike Springfield member. He was sort of one of the key minds behind the genesis of this. We're talking, we're working on like push note emails. I'm like, man, I think we got 20 people. And that was sort of including the 8 of us from Walk Bike Springfield who would show up. And we were really fortunate. We had about 50 to 60 people show up. And what was awesome too is that, yes, there were a lot of people from Springfield, but there were also a lot of people from neighboring communities. There were people from, all sorts of different backgrounds. We had a couple kids with their families on the ride. We had one dad who had his, young toddler on the back of a cargo bike. And so it was really awesome just to see how many people who got to experience the city for this first way. And I also got to experience it that way too. There were a lot of places that I hadn't ridden because I was just like, oh, well, I'd never think about getting there by bike. So it was just a blast. I think it really energized me. It was just nice to see people come out. I think it really energized our organization. There's a couple other inspirational activities. One thing that I'm really excited to see the scene, I was just driving around, we're actually getting at St. James in Carew, they're doing a intersection revamp. And it's going to be really our first, not counting the bike path along the river or bike paths in parks, but it's going to be our first bit of protected, separated bike infrastructure, which is really exciting for us. And it's not even done yet. And we had our meeting last night, and it's around that neighborhood. And I'm driving by, and I go through that intersection, and I see 3 people on bikes. They're just waiting at the red light. So it's really, again, we as a city have a lot of progress to make as far as the attitudes that we have towards infrastructure and investing in infrastructure. But it is nice to see that progress. It can get kind of doom and gloom sometimes when you're in some of these traffic commission meetings. But then, every now and then you get that sort of silver lining that pops up. You see that. And then one sort of my last little bit of inspiration here. I think we're really fortunate. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I am able to sit on the MapHab board, but also this year I am fortunate enough to be a member of the T4MA Champions Institute cohort, which is a fantastic organization. I'm not just saying that because you guys are sitting front row. But it really does feel very fortunate, very privileged to be able to be on both simultaneously. To not only like get to learn so much from the awesome crew, but then also like sort of take what I've learned and then apply it locally and apply it at a state level too. So it's just two really fantastic things. And again, as with MapHab, with the T4MA, it's sort of I really, really do encourage people to apply for those things. They're truly fantastic. Can't recommend them enough. Challenges, oh boy. It's not gonna take too long. Yeah, would you guys believe it that we get pushback from city employees? I'm shocked, right? No, we do. There's a lot of big picture stuff. I think one thing that sort of frustrates me is like lack of industry support. I think that, and this is my first job ever was like working in a bike shop in high school. So that was over a decade ago. But I've always felt that there's this large disconnect, both from like brands and also retail organizations. And that frustrates me because really we're sort of on the same fight here. The industry is really willing to be benefited by better advocacy, by better infrastructure. And I think that that's something that Springfield sort of is not the only one who faces these, but compared to a lot of other communities in Massachusetts, sort of affected by. And it's no surprise that Springfield is in many ways sort of under-invested in. But like if you are someone and you want to buy a new bike in Springfield and you don't want to go to Walmart or Target, you need to leave city limits. There are no bike shops in the city, in Springfield. And that makes me sad, because I love bike shops. I think they're a great place to form community, to create community, and get education. And again, like there's probably no one working at the Walmart who's going to say like, oh yeah, like here's all these local resources. That's just not really Walmart's focus, right? And so that frustrates me. And I think that Springfield itself also, when it comes to infrastructure, faces a lot of negative. I mean, there's a lot of negative perceptions about Springfield in general. I think typically it's a place that people look at as like, well, why would we bother investing there? It's not a place that we really want to invest in. And I think that when you have that mindset, particularly as some members of city government, it is very hard to want to even take on like easy activities to make the city better. MassDOT's giving out free speed signs. There's 10 signs available for us, and they just don't want to do it. Like it's 10 signs, and they don't have a person to do it. And that's something as well as Springfield that sort of surprises me, is that it's like, you wouldn't know that it's the fourth largest city in New England, because like we don't have someone to install 10 speed signs. We don't we don't have our own plows. We got to contract all of that out. And so that creates these weird sort of hiccups and road bumps. Not literally, because they do not want to install raised crosswalks, because we're operating in a way that feels different to so many other communities, especially respective to our size as a city. Again, like you go to Springfield and you wouldn't know it. You almost wouldn't know that it's a city in some places. We've also had, discoverability as a group. I think that's something that we also really want to work on. And then a big challenge for us, and this sort of loops back into the inspiration, was like knowing about what infrastructure is available. So if you had looked at, say, Google Maps, and I like to use Google Maps as an example because, they have an infrastructure layer. You can go to Google Maps, turn that on and say, show me the bike lanes in my city. And when I moved to the area, when I was doing research as to where I wanted to look for an apartment, I was like, well, I want to make sure there's an area that's decently bikeable. And I look on the map and it's like there's nothing available. So anyways, I moved to the area. I'm driving around and I start seeing all these bike lanes. And like that's such a terrible way to discover local infrastructure. Like bike infrastructure is in your car. So I realized that like we have miles of bike lanes. And if you didn't know about them or if you didn't live next to them, there is no way really to find these, and this is something we've noticed a lot across particularly our part of the state, is that yes, it's someone's job to plan those lanes, it's someone's job to build those lanes, but after that, they wash their hands and they say, well, my job's done. It's no one's job really to say, how do we let people know about these lanes? That is something that we have an issue with in Springfield. I know in Westfield, they've had a big issue with it. And that was a real disincentive to me because like there were places I wanted to get to on my bike, but I didn't feel comfortable on it until I knew that those lanes were there. So if you are having that same sort of issue, there is actually a fix. What I found was that so MassDOT has a continuously updating map of all of the infrastructure in the state. It's pretty accurate. And one day, so I found this map, I'm scrolling through like developer Google forums, and I'm like, how do I make changes to Google Maps? And there is something called Maps Content Partners. So apparently, really anyone can apply for this. It's mostly intended for like planning agencies, government organizations, but you know, I was just like, all right, shoot, let's apply, let's see if we get in. You know, we applied as like an NGO. A week later, they're like, all right, cool, here's the back end to Google Maps, go crazy. So what's great though is that because it was something that like, again, they don't have someone who installed 10 signs, they don't have someone whose job really was to like make sure all of the bike lanes were updated. And so because it was no one's job, it just didn't happen. And so, you know, I a couple late night, like caffeine filled, like YouTube tutorials on how to use GIS. And then, you know, it's a fairly straightforward, once you get the hang of it, process to make sure you format everything just in the way that Google wants. And now they're up. So what's great is that now I'll be out on places that I wouldn't have thought that I could ride, and I'll see other people riding in those areas. And that, like, again, it was a challenge, and that sort of loops back to the inspiration, but yeah, so that's something that if anyone else has questions about, if you're like, well, we have that problem, how would I get involved with that? Feel free to flag me down after, and I can give you the more technical, boring version.
Thank you. We're gonna now move back to Alexis, who's gonna talk a little bit more from the East Hampton perspective and the rail trail.
I wear too many hats. I don't know what hat I have on sometimes. My actual role at Mass Bike is regional advocacy specialist. So I kind of use East Hampton as a little bit of a science experiment to see, or a political science experiment to see what I can get done. So the Manhattan Rail Trail itself is an extension of the Norwottic Network, which is part of the Mass Central Rail Trail. The group came together in the 90s, mostly fundraising. They still do not have a mission statement to this day. There is an NGO, Friends of the Northampton Rail Trail, and there is a city committee. It's all the same people. There's no distinction. In a city committee, we talk about fundraising. You're not supposed to do that. So there are some issues, and to this day, all our meetings are still filled with maintenance. And the city itself, East Hampton, only agreed to build the trail if they didn't have to take care of maintenance. So the same people, 25, 35 years later, are still organizing all of the lawn mowing and the leaf plowing and the trees and the fence and the trash pickup and the dog poop. And it's very much a quagmire. And again, every time, and the woman who was leading the charge used to be our city clerk. She retired a year ago. So she was hoping to move this on to DPW, the Parks Department. I think she said it was on her desktop since 2008. So we're moving at a glacial speed here. And my goal is to separate, my hope is to separate out the two groups, and the Friends group would still do all the stuff they're currently doing. And then the city committee could move on to actually working on the rest of our bike network. Because since then, we do now have bike lanes, and we even have put up on Route 5, we have our first little cute little bike crosswalk. We're still starting to build out bike infrastructure, but you wouldn't know it from going to the committee that I've been sitting on for 4 years. So that's kind of makes me a little bit sad. But again, I think we have founderitis. No, it was never mind. We have founderitis, which is when the founders are still running the committee and trying to do maintenance. I learned that word like a month ago in another meeting, and I'm like, oh, I'm still doing that. But yeah, again, with what Kristen talked about, I'm envious of Holyoke for having a bike ped committee. I don't think she realizes that. And people join our committee and move to East Hampton for the rail trail and join the committee because they think it's a bike ped committee, and it is not. And a committee is, I think, necessary for, like, I don't know if any one of you have heard about the problems they're having in Northampton with the Main Street redesign. So without local, and we're gonna be up next, our Main Street redesign is on the tip for 29. It's been pushed back a few times, slid a little bit. But the first rendition of the Main Street redesign had amazing, like, the park was going to be added to the new city hall. There was going to be patio space. There's going to be bike lanes. There was going to be, you know, a new traffic circle. And then then we lost our mayor to DCR, our city engineer to Brookline, our planner to Amherst, and we were just left with the DPW. So the DPW took over the project. He is in the project area, and now it is exactly the same on the tip. The designs look exactly the same as it is now, with one shared use path added. It's a bit of a swing and a miss. And I don't know if there's anything I can do about it. And I even sit on the MassDOT design exception review, so I get to see behind the scene all 200 projects that are going on in the state, and I just watch them be, you know, pencil whipped right along. So it's a little bit of, you know, having to, like, what I learned in my work really is to kind of, I mean, I think MassDOT does this too. If the politics aren't right in an area, just back off and move to the next project. And even if you're going to lose one, there's 5 other in the queue. So don't cry over spilled milk. I really do care about the Main Street redesign because I live right next to it, but it's going to be improvement no matter what. And I'm hoping that we can get something, you know, inspirational that will encourage biking all the way up to the co-op, biking up to the post office, biking up to our, because, you know, like everyone, we had a dense urban core, and in the 60s and 70s and onwards, everything is moving out to the suburbs. Yeah, I'm rambling.
Well, we have another half hour here.
Okay.
And actually a little bit more.
I'm gonna go to my inspiration.
Okay. give
So
me your
I
inspiration.
was able to get us to do something other than talk about trash cans. And the first thing I was able to get us to do was do bike ballet. And like the founders, as if it will, said that they wouldn't be anyone to do show up with bikes for cultural chaos, which I'm bad at my zeros. 4 zeros, 10,000 people come to, which got canceled this year because money. But the bike racks, I only brought 6. They were full in an hour. There was 80 bikes in one day. That was 3 years ago. The following year, the rail trail was closed, so no reason like anyone would bike to the event because they closed off for a Mass Trails grant. The rail trail, we still got 25 bikes. This year it was closed. The event was canceled altogether. So I pivoted to a mayoral ride, which we had last month. 30 people, first ride. And again, I thought that would be like 8 to 10. Helps that we have a charming new mayor who declares himself to be a bike advocate, and we have a new person on the board who works for East Hampton Media who made a video promo and posted it on Facebook. So, you know, a little bit more like recognition from the community. And then All Bodies on Bikes did their Pride ride also from the same spot like last weekend. 50. So there is definitely an appetite. People were coming from all over the valley to go to these rides, builds community, like, yeah, events, and have fun and make it accessible. That's my, okay, now I'm done. You can have it.
Okay. I want to turn it over to the audience for both either questions, or I happen to know that the South Hadley Bike Committee has done one of the most inspirational projects that was shared in our February meeting with its the benches, and to encourage people to walk around. So if you want to.
Yeah, so there was a project that was completed in terms of We have an interactive map that you can go around and identify where benches are placed in South Hadley. And certainly with that map, we can identify where the gaps are. So, you know, we were fortunate enough that we placed a new bench along Route 202 and looking to, you know, expand that in terms of, again, where are there missing benches in town?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one of the last things you just mentioned was accessibility, and I'm just curious about, like, I heard in the first talk when we were in the other building, something about wheelers. I'm curious about like accessibility options for people that might have an injury, but they want to be on a bike, or they have some kind of disability challenge that makes them do going in on a bike ride like that, but they would like to. I'm curious, yeah, about any ideas for bike transit that can be accessible for various abilities, like.
Well, I'll speak to All Out Adventures, if folks know them. They're based in Northampton. Again, I spoke at my job at the Appalachian Mountain Club. We actually were working with them, and now the AMC actually built an accessible trail in Nobleview, which actually has a view of Springfield. It's really amazing. But there, I know, are some folks that are partnering with All Out Adventures on, you know, having trikes and leading bike rides. Thankfully, actually, there's a real opportunity to expand accessible trails, and the Massachusetts Office of Outdoor Recreation partnered with some folks to just do a report actually looking at all the trails in the Commonwealth, particularly DCR ones, and which ones are accessible. Sometimes it can be a little daunting for municipalities because they are more expensive, and you also need to make sure that they're maintained, because if there's any barrier to it, then folks can't use it. So I know that there are, you know, several things going on around trying to increase accessible trails. And then one thing also that one of our colleagues in our cohort mentioned is they're doing a lot to look at bus stops as well, and the ability of people to be able to have a place to wait for the bus, which I think is also an accessibility issue. And then, you know, I think one thing that we would like to do more as a city committee is to work more with other committees like the Disability Commission, also the you know, Council on Aging and things like that, because we all share the same goals of wanting to make sure that everyone can you know, get access. So I think if a town is planning a new infrastructure project, it should have protected bike lanes, curb cuts. You know, it should be like the lowest bar, so the most amount of people can benefit from it. And we know that it makes it easier for drivers too when there are protected bike lanes and, you know, long enough walk signs so that you can actually get across the street to your destination. But I don't know if others have thoughts on
Well,
this.
that's
What I was gonna say too.
That was one of the things when we did a walk audit from the Independence House and Costello House, which is senior housing off of Roosevelt Avenue. And it's a third of the mile across Roosevelt down a park road to the senior center. No sidewalk, but we had definitely identified that the traffic light across the street from the senior housing is a high school. So the crossing length was timed for those high school students. They're a lot faster than one of our walk audit participants who was actually using a walker and walked across, and we were there. These are the kinds of things we do on a walk audit, is time, you know, time the traffic lights and stuff. Neil, you wanted to say something more? Or?
Yeah, I can talk about this really quickly. I mean, there's a couple things. So I think like what you're saying, you know, yes, All Out Adventures, they're a great crew. There are a lot of really awesome solutions that they have. Not only do they have really great like community rides, they also sell adaptive equipment. And of course, disability is a very wide spectrum. I also believe that like just sort of inherently more walkable the role of those cities like are accessibility. But I also think that there's a lot of stuff that's like accessibility but is boring. So personally for me, and this is in October of 2024, I had a seizure. And the law in Massachusetts is that if that happens, you need to give up your driver's license, which makes sense. You know, they don't want me like passing out and running a bunch of people over with my car. So it wasn't really getting to work that was the problem. You know, I was fortunate that I lived close to a bus stop and my work was close to a bus stop. It was getting to the bus stop because, as mentioned, we don't own our own plows. Everything's contracted. So it would mean that someone would come by and they'd plow and the street would be completely iced over. So it meant I couldn't safely walk. It meant I couldn't safely bike to the bus stop. There is also, so it's stuff like that too. I think that, like, yes, I'm not saying like, no, we shouldn't focus on curb cuts or ramps, but there's a lot of other stuff too that doesn't, I think, jump out as like capital A accessibility. That it's like, until you can't drive, you gotta walk to the bus in the winter every morning. You're like, oh yeah, this also is kind of a bummer. This is bad. So
To add on to that, I strongly recommend everyone know how to report See-Click Fix 311 or email their DPW. And I had a little victory in East Hampton where I was walking down to Cottage Street, down Union Street, brand new, gorgeous curb cuts along the whole route, brand new street. Both gas stations plowed their gas station and put the ice on the curb cuts. So I entered a ticket to DPW and they gave a citation to both gas stations. They emailed me back a month later. So yeah, frequently, every time you go for a walk, look for accessibility issues and report them. I mean, most people don't really even want their city employees going around and looking for accessibility issues. It would be too time consuming. You are the eyes and the ears for your DPW.
Yes, go ahead over there. That was the same question. Thank you, Kai, for asking. I love your answers, but I just wanted to ask you guys, I guess you specifically. I also have used All Out Adventures, and I don't know if it's changed, but I don't think there's any way to borrow a trike for Cultural Chaos. I don't think there's any way to borrow a trike for Ashland Reservoir in Holyoke. I also lived there. I bought a trike from All Out Adventures, and I triked from Northampton to home in Holyoke one time. It was so scary, I never did anything like that again. I don't even go to the Ashland Reservoir now because I can't fix it. There's nowhere near to fix it. I'm just wondering, like, specifically, if I wanted to get more accessibility, you know, to go to Cultural Chaos, do we volunteer for All Out Adventures? Like, what do we do? Am I mistaken? Like, does All Out Adventures help with any of that, or is it just, you know, you can't really have a 9 to 5 and do any of their activities either. So when I had a brain injury 15 years ago, I'm not supposed to bike. I am allowed to drive. But, you know, when I went back to teaching, I was unable to do any of that stuff. So yeah, so I love these questions. My next question besides that is how to help get people in Holyoke to free food in Holyoke, because it's very accessible. It's been a huge
We do have a few mobile bike shops in the valley. We have a friend that runs one of them. I know recumbent bikes are slightly different, but I'm sure he could either look at it or come in and find the correct. His name, the company is Speed Sprocket. Okay. He's amazing. He's out of Northampton. Yeah, and he also helps run the Bikes for All.
I don't have it. He's also
he does
services our bikes for Western Mass Wheelers. He's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and he also helps for Bikes for All, which is a free service up in the Florida Hills.
But I would also say with All Out Adventures, I mean, they definitely want to be accessible, and that's their main goal, is for people to be able to, you know, get outside. And so Karen, who's our executive director, you know, super approachable. So I think you could also, you know, share some of your concerns and your interest, and, you know, maybe they're interested in having you learn to be an instructor, and then you could offer those opportunities for other folks. I mean, I know everyone's pretty busy, but, you know, I don't know. I think if I see something where there's like a need, I'm like, can I help, or can someone else help? So I'm sure they would be amenable to that. And also just getting the feedback of, you know, when things are offered. I mean, I'm here on a Friday because I have a job that's a 32-hour work week. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to be here. So, we try to like have our meetings at night or, and other times when people can participate who have 9 to 5s. So I think it can be sometimes a challenge, and even in my involvement with the Appalachian Mountain Club, a lot of things were offered during the day because people are retired, but that doesn't really build the next generation of advocates because, not everybody can do stuff during the day, so.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you recommend going through them or maybe starting something. Because I have asked them and it doesn't feel that accessible.
I think they lost a lot of money last year.
Yeah, it's just time, I guess.
Yeah.
Talking and no easy answers.
I mean,
So
I would
glad
say
you guys are doing what you do.
if you feel so inspired, start something different. I mean, even, I know it's a lot. You could just start small. You could even have just like some friends, that you ride with. I've always been really impressed with. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's so much to do and so few people who are willing to step up, as we all know, and people are super swamped. So I would say, and we can also help, promote it. I think there's a lot of people that would be interested in that. One thing also to think about is reach out to the Massachusetts Office of Outdoor Recreation. Paul Janicki, he worked for DCR for many years. He actually lives in Williamsburg, so he's pretty close. He's a cyclist. It's Paul Janicki. It's the Massachusetts Office of Outdoor Recreation. And they just were the ones that released this report with some consultants about the amount of accessible trails that exist. But he used to work for DCR. He's got great connections to Mass Trails. And you could say, hey, I want to do this. Do you have any support? Do you know some other folks that, he has a statewide purview. So, he might be able to help out. I mean, just probably having some initial conversations about seeing what's possible. And then I think just, starting small, maybe you just do one event and then, kind of build it and they will come. So
I also recommend All Bodies on Bikes, and they work a lot with a lot of ventures. Well, lots of alls.
Back there had a question? Yes, you.
I'm Rachel, with the Alliance for Digital Equity, and this actually in our June monthly meeting, Doug Hall from Pioneer Valley Planning Commission suggested that our group, I am the grants manager for a number of initiatives, and one of them is public space Wi-Fi. So Doug said, why don't you consider creating an initiative or a project for public space Wi-Fi related to the bike trails, accessibility around the bikes that are being able to be rented. And you mentioned
Valley Bike.
Yeah, you mentioned this bike, the new area that's coming online soon for bike an area for. I actually have to look back at my notes, but I'm thinking of infrastructure, accessibility, and also using bikes for school and work, commuting. So I wanted to find out, given that, who would the right folks, the committees to go to, would that be, if you have any sense of the feasibility of such a project? Normally, the groups that apply for this funding are nonprofits that are established in a place, like community gardens, farmers markets, and also libraries.
I would actually point you back to PVPC.
Yeah. They
have a bike ped subcommittee that's open to the public, although you wouldn't know it. It's at 9:15. 9:15 in the morning. The second Wednesday of the month, Jeff McCullough runs it. And it's that's the one Betsy and I are on. And they know just they know all the stuff. They do a lot of background reports and know all the contacts for the whole valley. And he's married to the person who runs the Franklin County. So he's very insistent.
he has all the inside scoop.
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. My name is Kristen. I am the Massive Motion Coordinator for Hampshire County, and one of the main projects I work on is the Hampshire County Food Policy Council. So I appreciated the question about biking and pedestrian access to food access. But my question is actually, the reason that I was excited about this panel was because I saw resident advocacy in the title, and a lot of what we do is building capacity for community members to be advocates. And I'm thinking about all that you're talking about, and I think like this intersection is coming up for me. Like, I really appreciate all the talk about access. And in my experience, it's not only, people on the spectrum of disabilities, but also people who have families or who are just not bikers, people who just don't really see themselves as taking their bike out to, especially I appreciated, like somebody said, biking is recreational. Like, well, there's more than that. Like, biking can get you to food access points. And so my question is kind of like at this intersection of like, how do we talk to people who feel like biking is not for them, and maybe like do have experience with education activities to engage people that may not think biking is really for them. And then also, I think when we think about advocacy, like building our base to get more and more people to care about bike and pedestrian access, have you any experience with like mobilizing residents to get involved in the communities that you're involved
That is
in?
our overall challenge.
Okay, yeah. And I heard you mention stipends and like youth slots, which is very exciting to me. That's a lot of what.
And we found though that on the pedestrian side of things, that's where the walk audit as an organizing tool has become so effective and got folks involved.
Getting people out.
Walk Massachusetts has a series of little videos on their website that go through sort of the steps, basic steps related to walk audits. So does the AARP, who's also recognized that it's one of their main tools to get seniors involved with improving pedestrian infrastructure and advocacy. So that, those kinds of activities, that is why when Mass in Motion was more robust, we in fact did a whole series of walk audits with the Hilltops.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, and we were a part of that.
Yeah.
So,
Unfortunately, that funding was cut down, but
yes.
I was just gonna speak to the food accessibility.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought this up. Well, we all wear lots of hats, and another hat I wear is a farmer hat. So my husband and I have an 8.5 acre farm, organic farm in Northampton. You can actually get to it by a bike, bus, walking, car. And it's right by the airport. Plane. Or plane, yeah, there's an airport right there. And it's called Pie in the Sky Berry Farm. We're UPEC organic. We're about to start blueberry season soon. But we also are part of the bicycle benefits program. So people do get a small discount when they ride their bike there. And this is one thing that I'm hoping we can eventually do in Holyoke. They do it in Northampton. It's I think a nationwide program, but it's international. So you can sell someone a bike benefit sticker, and then they can get discounts like all over the place. But you're making me realize that, we're close to the Norwottic Rail Trail, and I've actually ridden my bike from Holyoke to the farm. Although I get on the van hand, I don't want to go to the Oxbow because it's a little scary. But, I think we have lots of farmers markets in Holyoke, and of course they do in other places, and farms. And we're so proud to be in the city so that, you don't have to drive to get to it. But, it's a connection I hadn't personally made, even though I ride my bike to the farm, of making sure that folks know about infrastructure to be able to access local food. So, thinking about where our bike lanes are, our bus stops, how close they are to grocery stores, to, farmers markets, to farms, things like that is honestly something hadn't occurred to me to try to put into a map or an educational tool for people to learn about. But I think if you really want to have local food accessible, people need to be able to get to it. So.
well, and I can put Laura on the spot, which is why some people may find it interesting that it's the Western Mass Food Bank that is the core organizer for this conference, and because you 10 years ago recognized this key.
Access to
reliable transportation is one of the biggest causes of food
Mhm.
insecurity. Yeah, Liam, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just briefly on that too, I think that there's stuff that like we need to do on our side. Jesse Pierce from Reconnect Rochester out in Western Mass, we were having a conversation and we sort of touched on this thing of like the 15-minute advocate, where I think a lot of us here, we wear a lot of hats and we also like have jobs. And I think to a lot of people on the outside who aren't like super passionate about this, they're like, I've got stuff to do. But this idea is for really us to what is like, how can we get a group of people who are they're not going to show up every meeting. But when we send out a call like, hey, we need people to show up, and speak for a little bit at a city council meeting, who are those people? And then the other thing, and this is sort of an open invitation, and I think we'd love to collaborate with anyone who's interested, is that, and I don't like if anyone's ever shopped at IKEA, right? They don't just sell chairs. The way they have it laid out is they sell like a sense of space. So you're not buying a chair, you're buying something that you see exist in a whole space. And I think when people think about bikes, they think, well, that's a bicycle. It's either in my garage or I'm riding it on a trail. And just the number of conversations that I've had, say, like on my electric cargo bike, when I'm at the store, when I'm out, because people see that and then they make that connection. So I think that there needs to be a lot of sort of events of like bikes in spaces that aren't traditionally where people have seen them. So I'd love to see, like, I'd love to do an event like at a food bank where we get a bunch of electric bikes like at the bike rack and people can see them loaded up, right? Stuff like that, I think, sort of helps just that mindset shift.
So first the black and then the green.
I have more about a recommendation, I guess. Have you guys considered partnering with buses?
Did you say that? Or finances?
So I went to 2 school events this week, one in Springfield and the other one in East Hampton. And unfortunately, I was there with the leader of Safe Routes to School, the whole state, and I asked the principal if they wanted to do a bike bus, and he's like, yeah, maybe. And then the Safe Routes to School instructor, who's a MassDOT employee, was like, oh, they only have 2 bikes here. We don't need to do a bike bus. I'm like, excuse me? Flip the table. I do believe Northampton has a bike bus. It's just become really popular recently online. I thought Safe Routes to School was the person to go to, but apparently not. So there are other, I think we have a webinar on it at Mass Bike. Yeah, it's an emerging space and I think it's really important.
I know that they do have some walking school buses in Holyoke, and there's one school that I participated in, and it was so cute. And they actually like did a whole bunch of fun murals like along the sidewalk. And so I know that those are in different places, but it's probably kind of hit or miss, I think.
In the green?
I just want to say we have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
I'll make it quick. Thank you all for this really informative panel. I work for the Conway School of Planning and Design, a really small graduate program that we partner with communities, and you had asked like what others are doing in this realm. It's really helpful to hear about committee work. A lot of what we do is reach out specifically to municipal staff and employees, and maybe they don't have the type of time to really think about the issues in the way that you all do. So I appreciate that and would love to follow up with any of you if you have questions. 2 examples of projects that we've done that, we love to partner with communities on these types of projects is the City of Greenfield. We just finished an analysis, an inventory of bike lanes in the city and recommendations for just increasing safety and accessibility across the city, connectivity as well. And then another one with Berkshire County looking at connectivity between bus stops and conservation areas and trying to identify challenges between the 2 and how to improve those situations for folks that don't have cars. So anyway, thank you all, and would love to talk to anyone who's interested in this.
Yes, back there.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth. I am here with the organization, but I'm going to speak as myself for a second, as someone who lives in Springfield, about the question about outreach, right, and like trying to reach folks. I became radicalized around this issue. Hi, Betsy, when my colleague at the library was killed. And thanks to Walk Bike Springfield and the Armory Association, and the Armory Association and all of the work done. And I went to city council meetings, I did all of those things. And so, and I became very, as a librarian at that point, became very interested in this topic and, you know, Streets blog and like got into it. So, but I will say, like I posted about your 1700 ride on Reddit and a bunch of people were like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is the only place I've heard about it. Right. And it's just like, particularly in a city like Springfield, where the administration really. Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
It was on our website.
Someone's gonna ask me where I work and then I'm gonna say anything. So like it can be so frustrating, but I do think that there is a thing about like being inside the bubble of where like all y'all know each other and you're working on these things. But the people in Springfield, you know, I work with some of that who are like, you know, am I gonna put food on the table? Am I gonna pay my rent? Like, people don't even know about the 311 app. Like they don't know about that, and the city won't do a thing unless you tell them. So anytime anyone in the Springfield subreddit is like, "What about the potholes?" I'm like, "Did you take a picture?
Yeah.
Did you take a picture and send it to 311?" So there's definitely like a piece there that's missing, at least in Springfield. I don't know what the answer is, but yeah, there's a piece missing there. That, and not for the lack of effort of everybody in this room, to be perfectly clear. It's so hard. Sorry.
No, thank you.
And I'll just add, you know, just for Holyoke, but also, you know, probably for Springfield too, is people don't necessarily know the tools in which they can engage, or maybe they don't even feel comfortable, or maybe it's not even like a comfortable space to get up and have to speak before a city council meeting or like something like that. And I think that that's one thing that we're trying to encourage. And we always have like public comment at the beginning of our meetings, and not that many people come, but we're on Zoom. And I think it's just encouraging people to have that agency to take the photo and submit the pothole to the DPW. Maybe people are also used to asking for things and not getting it and being like, it's not even worth my time. So I think that there's that as well. And, you know, I think I'll speak for myself, but probably all of us is like, we would love more people to join us. We would love to encourage more people to get active, to improve things in their own neighborhoods for themselves and with other people, and to give them the tools. Like, you know, I can message my mayor on Facebook and he like gets back to me, and probably other people too, but they don't necessarily know that those tools even exist. And I think for those of us who are privileged to be able to engage, we want to make sure that everyone else knows that and can participate and make their lives better in their communities.
I should have the last question here.
My name's Tom, and I appreciate the information you're sharing. I'm a bike advocate, and I'm also a volunteer friend of the Belchertown Greenway, which is the 11 miles of unpaved trail that connect Palmer to the Water Trail at Warren Ranch Road, Belchertown. One of the things I look for in my own town is to see how we can improve that access. Right now, it's a trail that goes from pretty easy, you could do it on a road bike, to you need a mountain bike. So it's doesn't have the accessibility across the 11 miles of Belchertown. One of the things you mentioned, Liam, about like bike racks. Like I look around town with a focus now on like bike usefulness, and there are so many places that don't have bike racks. So why would people ride their bike there? It would be as crazy as saying, you know, to CVS, why isn't anyone coming to CVS? We didn't put any parking spaces. Like, why would you go if there wasn't a place to park? So I look at our school area. We have a high school, a middle school, and an elementary school. And among the three schools that are all adjacent to each other, there's like 2 or 3 bike racks. And it's within a half mile of the Belchertown Greenway, which would connect a big section of town. So like I think if people saw bike racks, they could say, oh, I could bike here. But if you don't see a bike rack as a biker, I don't want to just leave my bike in the way or feel like it's vulnerable to theft. Or, you know, I'd like to, you know, they say it's like build it and they will come. So I don't know who you ask, because if you say, well, would you, for a store owner, business owner, say, could you put a bike rack in? Well, no one comes here on a bike. Well, because you don't have a place to park your bike.
I do believe PVCC is starting a inventory of all of the bike racks. They did one in Springfield and they're branching out, and you're in PVCC territory. I know that CMRPC did a really extensive map of bike racks. We have like in East Hampton, we have really good bike racks at all the schools, but no Tuck Park, where all the kids go to play soccer, no bike racks. So yeah, mapping is probably step number 1, is identifying where they go.
I know you can also get grants Holyoke got a grant to do like an artistic bike rack, which I think actually got a little bit stalled. I know, sometimes they're artistic, but you can't actually park your bike there. So is it art or is it functional? But I do think that there probably are funding opportunities as well to be able to get bike racks installed. And it's such an important point that people need to know that they have a place to park their bike and a place to safely park their bike. I mean, you can take the train from Holyoke to New York City and I could ride there probably in 5 minutes, and there's no place to put a bike if I wanted to park my bike and then take public transit to the city. So I think you're right, and that's a really key piece, is like making sure we have the protected bike lanes and the places for people to park their bikes as they get around.
That's one of the advantages of a bike, is like the parking's not the same kind of
Exactly.
area. Or especially places where parking's at a premium, usually you can find a place to park your bike. And you can usually zoom past all the cars, waiting in traffic, and you just drive right by.
I love that.
It's nice to look to see how can we encourage people with visual clues, like you didn't have to ride your car the mile to the Stop and Shop, you could have cycled, but I don't always think about that.
Well, thank you all. Thanks for how do you get back to lunch?
I don't think so either. Nice to meet you. Very important about lobby day.
Yeah.
I just saw this recording. They're all. We just did it by ourselves.